Okay, so let's have a look at another example of the standard multiple choice question. Let's have another look at it, okay? And this one is reading passage 1, South Pole Adventurer. This comes from the official IELTS 2014 practice test 8. This is test number 4 and passage number 1. If you have it, if you've already bought it and you have it, feel free to practice along with us. If you want to, you can go ahead and stop the lecture now and try to do the questions on your own using the strategy that we've told you to do for multiple choice questions. And then, check your answers as I'm going through it. So you're more than welcome to do that also. But let's go ahead and look at it. Look at our questions. We had multiple choice questions 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So, like I said, the first thing we want to do is look and see which questions are going to be the easiest to do first. And some of these actually have some really good information in terms of being able to find where the information is located. Like number 9, we know is talking about this person, Shirais or Shirais, and reporters. That's a really good word to be able to find. 10 is easy to find because of the word Kainan Maru. I think the word Antarctica is everywhere. I don't know yet because I haven't looked at it. Number 12, easy to find because of 7th paragraph. And number 13 tells us it's in the final paragraph. So all of these, for this one, they pretty much have made it a little bit easier to find. But like I said, these multiple choice questions for this one are coming from reading passage 1. In the previous one, the multiple choice questions were in reading passage 3. So you can see these multiple choice questions that are in reading passage 1 are a little bit easier to locate and find because pretty much most of the time the exam gets progressively more difficult. Okay, most of the time. Sometimes that can depend on what question types they give you, but in general, the difficulty of the passages gets more difficult as you approach reading passage 3 because they have to do things to be able to separate the people, to be able to separate a 4 or 5 person from a 6, 7. They have to separate you guys out, and they do that by making it increasingly more difficult most of the time. All right? So let's look for number 9 first. I think that's going to be easy to find. Reporters and this guy Shirais. They say when reporters in New Zealand met Shirais, they were. All right, so let's look for it. And I'm scanning left to right. I'm scanning both sides. Actually, I'm scanning the left side first. And I'm looking for the word reporters or a word similar to the word reporters. It probably would have been smarter to start with number 10 because they had Kainan Maru, here's reporters right here. I see it right here. Reporters. All right, in New Zealand, local reporters were astonished. The ship was half the size of Amundsen's ship. True, it was reinforced with iron plate and extra wood, but the ship had only the feeblest engine to help force its way through ice. Feeble means like weak. Okay, but like I told you, a lot of times with multiple choice questions, I like to read like 2 sentences because sometimes they pull answer choices from a combination of 2 sentences, or they'll pull the question from one sentence and the answer from the next sentence. So, but I've told you that. So it says, in New Zealand, local reporters were astonished. The ship was half the size of Amundsen's ship, and it was reinforced with iron plate and extra wood, but the ship had a feeble engine. All right, so let's look at what our answer choices are. Concerned about the quality of its equipment, impressed with its design of the ship. We know it's not B, because they said they saw it was half the size, it had a weak engine. Certain he was unaware of the dangers. Hey, we can't make that choice. Surprised by his bravery. It tells us nothing about that. Correct answer here is going to be A. They were concerned about the quality of his equipment. because it said, wow, his ship is half the size and it has a weak engine. All right. So the synonym answer for that is that they were concerned about the quality of the equipment that he had. All right, let's look at number 10. What are we told? What are we told about the captain of the Kainan Maru in the 5th paragraph? Okay, what are we told about the captain of the Kainan Maru in the 5th paragraph? Yeah, see, Kainan Maru. So, yeah, it probably would have been better to start with number 10 first because, Kainan Maru, there's no synonym for that. So that's going to be really easy to find. That's going to be really easy to find. All right, so here we go. Kainan Maru. So here we have two sentences with the captain. We have this sentence right here with the captain, and we have this sentence right here with the captain. Okay? So we're looking for what does it tell us about the captain? All right? So I'm going to have to look at both of these sentences. All right, first sentence tells us, nevertheless, on the 11th of February, the Kainan Maru left New Zealand and sailed straight into the worst weather the captain had ever seen. All right, so this sentence tells us that the captain it was the worst weather the captain had ever seen. All right, now I'm right here, with a remarkable piece of seamanship. Seamanship means sailing. With a remarkable piece of seamanship, the captain steered the ship out of the ice and turned north. So it says the captain was a remarkable sailor. He did some remarkable sailing, a remarkable piece of seamanship. So that's what it tells us about the captain. So he had given Sharice some poor advice, nothing about that. His skill in sailing saved the boat and crew. He refused to listen to the warnings of others, nothing about that. He was confident they could reach the Antarctica. No, my correct answer is B. Because in those sentences it talks about his skill at saving, his remarkable sailing that he was able to do through the worst weather that he had ever seen. So our correct answer for number 10 would be B. All right, next, when we look at number 11, it says, after Sharice finally reached Antarctica, he realized that. So key words here are finally reached Antarctica. What did he realize? When he finally reached Antarctica, what did he realize? What's that the key words? When he finally reached Antarctica. Yeah, when he finally reached Antarctica. Oh, here it is. Finally reached Antarctica. All right, what did he realize? All right, a year later than planned, Sharice and 6 men finally reached Antarctica. All right, but this sentence doesn't tell me what he realized. All right, so I have to keep reading. Catching up with Scott on Amundsen was out of the question, and he had said he would stick to science this time. Still doesn't tell me anything that he realized. Yet Sharice still felt the pull of the pole and eventually decided he would head southward to experience the thrills and hardships of polar exploration he had always dreamed of. With provisions for 20 days, he and 4 men would see how far they could get. All right, so, this is going to be tricky. When I look at this, it tells us that he was going to stick to science, that he was going to experience the thrills and hardships of the polar exploration, and then it says that he only had provisions for 20 days. Provision means food. He was unsure of the direction. No, he wasn't unsure. He decided where he was going to go. He would have to give up. No, it didn't say he would give up. It said he was going to go and brave the hardships. He might not have enough food. That's our answer right there, C. Because it said he only had enough food for 20 days. He still wanted to compete in the race against other teams. When he finally reached. Yeah, so catching up with them was out of the question. So he wasn't, he said catching up with them was out of the question. So we can't compete in a race against the other teams. We can't say that because catching up with them was out of the question. But we can say that he realized he might not have enough food because it said he only had enough food for 20 days. That's a hard question. Number 11 was a difficult question. That's a tricky question. Wow. Because with that question, you had to read multiple sentences because you were trying to you had to get a sense of what he realized or what he might have realized. So that was a tricky one. All right, what is the writer doing in the 7th paragraph? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 7th paragraph. All right, so with this question also, again, you're going to have to just look at this paragraph. I mean, there's no way to get around it. One thing that might be helpful is you can look at the first 2 sentences maybe and look at the last sentence, and it might give you an idea of what it's talking about. All right, so I'm going to start right here. Cherise set off on January 20th with Takeda and 2 dog handlers, leaving 2 men at the edge of the ice shelf to make meteorological measurements. So the topic sentence tells me that this paragraph is about meteorological measurements, which means weather. And a lot of times, remember, if you know anything about paragraphs for English, you know that a topic sentence or the first sentence of a paragraph will describe what that paragraph is about. So it says, for a week they struggled through one blizzard after another, holding up in their tents during the worst of weather. The temperature fell by 25 degrees. All right. And so they're talking about the weather and the temperature dropping. Okay. And so our correct answer here, criticizing a decision concerning scientific research, no. Explaining why a particular mistake had occurred, no mistake was mentioned. Describing the conditions that the expedition faced, C. Yes. Because we can tell from the topic sentence that they're talking about meteorological conditions or describing meteorological conditions. All right, and then it talks about the weather dropping and things like that and what they had to do. So they're talking about the conditions that they faced, not having enough provisions or food for just 2 days. So that's what we have for number 12, is they're describing the conditions that the expedition faced. And then for our last one, for number 13, what is his main point in the final paragraph? On February 3rd, all the men were heading home. The ship reached Tokyo in June 1912, and Cherise was greeted like a hero, despite the fact he never reached the North Pole. All right. His expedition was heroic. They traveled beyond 80 degrees south, only one of 4 teams that have gone so far. They did it without advantages of the other teams and no experience. So in this sentence, it's talking about the guy was greeted like a hero, even though he didn't reach the pole, and that he did it without the advantages of the other teams and without experience. So what are they doing here in this final paragraph? Considering the problems he had to deal with, his achievement was incredible. That's probably correct. The reaction came as a surprise to him. We don't have any information about that. It's obvious that Amundsen will receive more attention. There's no information that says that. Cherise had achieved more on the expedition than they even had expected. It doesn't say that. It tells us that, considering that he had never done it before, he had no experience, he had no advantages. They're telling us that he had these problems, but he was still greeted like a hero. Okay, so our correct answer for number 13 is going to be choice A. Considering the problems of no advantages and no experience, his achievement was incredible. He was greeted like a hero. That's the writer's main point of the final paragraph, right? So what makes multiple choice questions a challenge sometimes is that, they do go in order, but a lot of times for multiple choice questions, you have to really interpret the sentences. You have to interpret the meaning from the sentences, because they're going to use synonym language a lot of times for the correct answer choice. They're going to use synonym language. You have to really interpret what is being said. And even though this question, the multiple choice question, goes in order, and that makes it somewhat easy to be able to find the right information to read, you still have to interpret what that information in the passage says, and then find the correct answer that is using synonym language. So that's what makes it a challenge. All right. So I will talk to you soon, and we're moving on.